strange thing to a person who may not be aware, but the reality is that good hypnosis is communication, and the roots of NLP are in Ericksonian hypnosis, based primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on the work of Milton Erickson, an American psychiatrist who revolutionised the way hypnosis was done. Come on in and make yourself comfy, as best you can. Would somebody who's got technical bent like to turn that air conditioner on up there? I think it's only on a fan, and there's enough of us that we're probably going to generate a bit of heat. Is it?
Yeah. It is only on fan. Yeah. So.
So,
do you want it on cool, Dave?
Cool?
How are we all feeling?
Yeah.
I think we should have it on cool until we get to the place where somebody says, I can't stand this. And then we'll all right, well look, I think that we'll do the best we can to use the time to the best of our ability. So Glenn has first come off the rank tonight, and I'm going to turn over to him.
Okay, thanks, mate. Alrighty, well, I'm just thinking, how many of you guys have seen me speak or talk or something in some way, shape or form? Who are in the room? Okay, and the rest of you should. Well, that's good. Yeah. I'm glad you guys have come, and some of you guys, it seems, have just come just because I said. I'm looking Clinton's way. Now, what are we doing here tonight, Glenn? And some of you guys have come from distances, so well done for the Toowoomba mob and the Gold Coast mob. So that's excellent. Still waiting on a couple that RSVP that aren't here yet, so we'll make them sit right up front. All right, just grab a seat, guys, and there's still a few elsewhere. But if you're out the front, you know David's going to hypnotise you. I'm just kidding, no, he's not. All right. I was thinking about it today that I was so, and for any of you guys who have seen me speak and, you know, all jacketed and suited and stuff, I was lucky to even get this professionally dressed tonight. Oh, thanks, mate. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to the first thing I'm going to touch on, because really David's the main act in what we're going to do here for the next couple of weeks, but I wanted to give you guys, I guess, a bit of a foundational chat. If I could sum up the next couple of weeks, you know, tonight and next week, and give you a bit of an overview of what you're going to be learning. Primarily, what I'm going to talk to you guys about is how we can use our words, both written and spoken, in order to influence others more effectively. And as David just said, that, you know, good NLP, good hypnosis, I mean, I've heard one definition of hypnosis by a guy who is the co-owner of this clinic and practice called Glenn Chandler. One definition of hypnosis that he gave was any communication that influences. You know, any communication that influences. So by that definition, every time you've watched a commercial on television, and then you know, even watched the commercial and bought that product, you've been somewhat hypnotised. You know, I was looking over some of my exams when I did a diploma of clinical hypnotherapy here in these rooms, and I was looking over some of my exams that I wrote some years ago, and in Module 1, one of the questions David asks is define hypnosis. And so I wrote this definition that I thought. And my answer in the final module, David asks the same thing. Define hypnosis. You know, with now your understanding, you've done a year worth of study, define hypnosis. And my answer was, you know, whatever it kind of was. But then I said, but since, in learning all these things, since it's been so argued and so debated, come on in, folks. That must be Steve Goons, is it? Good to see you, mate. Grab a seat somewhere, mate. Good to see you. Anyway, here, there's a couple left. We're free. He's made up from the coast. He's done well. My answer to that question, one of the final questions of the final thing is define hypnosis with your now enlightened study. And it was something like, here's what I think, but I'm satisfied given that some of the greatest minds in heads are yet to define it to any degree of certainty. I'm happy to not quite know. You know, but I tell you, I don't mind that one, any communication that influences. So primarily, what I'm going to have a yarn to you guys about is a little bit about how people think, and a little bit about how we can use those understandings with a better ability to, I suppose, persuade more effectively. Some of the secrets and tricks that advertising companies have used to make you guys buy their product. Give you a couple of examples of how these sorts of techniques have been used by, as seemingly boring products as butter. How they've used, and I spotted one that was plain as day to me, as I watched this. Here these guys are embedding language into the sale of Flora Proactive, and they're using these techniques that we're going to talk about in order to get you to buy the double-priced Flora Proactive stuff. So I'm going to talk to you about some of that stuff. But that's, I guess, to me, secondary. Your ability to use these skills on other people is probably, well, is certainly in my mind, secondary to what David's primarily going to talk about. And David's primarily going to talk about getting you right first. And because I reckon most sales, in my opinion, most sales are made and broke between the ears of the salesperson and not with the prospect, and whatever sale that might be. So, you can have all the clever, we could call them manipulative tactics in the world, and if they're coming where you're not right first, then you're probably going to have limited, if no, power. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about for the coming period of time. And before we get on to any of that, we've got to, I guess, get just a foundational start in understanding of how the mind is structured. Because I was reading over this book, and actually, it's a book by Brian Clemmer. It's not bad, but the first thing in this book, the book is called "If How-Tos Were Enough, We Would All Be Skinny, Rich and Happy." Yeah, because how many books have there been made on those three subjects? Skinny, rich and happy. And one of the first things this guy says in this book is, and it's in big and bold, and it's there at the front of this book, and this may be somewhat offensive to someone in the room, I don't know, but it could be. It might be insulting to someone who's got a strong, intelligent, let's say, conscious mind, or IQ, or, the ability to cognitive, that part of you that I'm talking to that's listening. That intelligence part of you, what we might call our conscious mind. If you've got a good one of them, and I say to you that you and your intellect, as high as that IQ might be, that you do not make 99% of your decisions. Your programs, and we could insert a bunch of synonyms for that word, programs, but your programs make them for you, but you think that you're choosing. Yeah? So you're not making all these decisions that you might think that you're making. I'll give you an example. Who's been an employer in the room? We've got a couple of principal licensees. Yeah. And out of those employers, how many of you guys had to do job interviews? Yeah? Yeah, okay. So I would suggest that in those job interviews, you've made up your mind very early in the job interview whether this person's got the job. I would suggest kind of like that. And you've spent the next hour doing one of two things. Either justifying your reason that you decided you're going to give this person the job, or going through the motions just to humour them so you don't say after 2 minutes, well, look, I've seen enough, see you later. We make those decisions, and what do we make those instant snap decisions on? I mean, if you see me across a crowded room with a bald head and a goatee, there's certain connotations that my physical appearance gives to people. And yet, from across a crowded room, you don't know my values, my beliefs, whether or not we might be mates or, or in sync or out of sync. It's just that we make those first impressions. And based on what? A whole bunch of different things. And our unconscious mind, what he calls the programs, or it could have a bunch of different synonyms attached to that, but the sum total of everything that we have experienced, seen, felt, heard, thought about, that sum total of all of our subjective experience all adds up to this thing that we call our unconscious mind, and we base all our decisions on that history. So what I'm going to do for the next little bit of time is go through a little bit about how those two parts of us think. Because like all day today, I was seeing hypnosis clients in these rooms here today, and they've all got something that they come here. It might be a smoking issue, it might be weight loss, it might be phobias. There's a whole bunch of different things that we see people fall. And they've all got this conscious mind that doesn't want to do this thing, or does want to do something different or whatever, and yet they've got this unconscious part of them that is fighting them and doing everything but. it's still smoking, and as they light up to smoke, they're saying to themselves consciously, why the hell am I doing this, as they do it. And so the unconscious mind, and the terms subconscious and unconscious can be intertwined, even with that word programs, that's what he's saying, programs, unconscious, subconscious, is it doesn't have it has a logic, but it's not the same sort of intellectual logic that we're talking about. And you would have all come across, whether it's a person or a product or something that you bought, that just seemed right. There was just something about the person that just seemed like they could be trusted. And then you've also met other people that, there's something about them, and it may not be any one little thing that you can cognitively put your finger on, but there's just something about them. And everyone's had that kind of experience. But do you see how you can't kind of put your finger on it and you say there's just something? I'll get you in a sec, Deborah. Yeah. When that sort of thing is your unconscious mind giving you the feeling, because it doesn't have an English language to say to you, excuse me, Eldon, by the way, that person that you're talking to is about to be a dodgy person and he's going to do something wrong. It doesn't have that sort of words for you. It just gives you that uneasy feeling that something's not right about this person, place, product, whatever. But
apparently we feel 40,000 times faster than we think.
Okay. Yeah. I like and again, a lot of the time, and I agree with that. I don't know if the number's right, but I couldn't agree more. Is like when he says that we don't make 99% of our decisions. Well, who says 99? But it doesn't matter. The point is, whether it's 90, 80, 95 or 99, the point is most of the stuff you're doing without your permission. You're where you are because of these programs. You're in the job you are because of this unconscious mind. You're at the level of success in your job because of this unconscious mind of yours. So that's sort of what we're going to have a bit of a yarn about for a little bit. And actually, talking about what Deborah just said, there's a guy called Irwin Yalom, and he's a really good guy. I've got a quote of his, but I'm just going to get his quote, because his quote goes on a little bit. What he's saying is, imagine this, with communication, and that's really what this is all down to. It's down to our ability to communicate with another human being. And what he's saying in this book, a book called Love's Execution, it's a very good book. It's a therapy book, that I read, and it's saying that when you have to say, like when I'm saying some words to you guys, it starts because our mind kind of thinks in images. It kind of thinks in images with rich, I think he uses the terms, rich, fleecy textures, and we all know that this amazing, our inner thought is an untold and untapped, vast thing with the way we think. And then what we've got to do is we've got to convert those images with all their vast stuff down into thought, then down into this very clumsy thing that we've got called language, right, being English, or in this case. Then the next step is it's got to go to another human being, get heard by their ears, then get transferred back into thought, and then back into image in their head. And can you imagine, that's a pretty treacherous path to go from my image to yours, and rarely would that transfer go without casualty. You know what I mean? It's going to get, once it's received into that imagery, it's going to be pretty different, like the old Chinese whispers thing, than how I might have intended it. And lots of, come on in. It's all good. Come on in. There's a couple more seats left, so come on in. So what he's sort of saying, come on, what he's sort of saying is that, and he's also saying that poets and lyricists and other artistic type people have tried all sorts of ways through metaphor and through imagery and through great artistic things to try and shortcut and get a more accurate representation of what they were trying to say. But really the task with which we've got to work, being language, is oftentimes, even as we get very, very good at it, it's a very limited tool that we've got. So that's what we're going to kind of try and have a yarn about, at least for this first session, is the different language that both the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, let's say, talk in or use. Talk being communicate with, let's say. So now let me I'm going to get the whiteboard thing going. All right. I had some stuff on PowerPoints, but then I thought if we're as full as we as we are, there is no way I'm going to get a PowerPoint projector. There's no way I'm going to have a projector in the middle of this. So I had to transfer it all to flip charts. So next week we're going to go through some of the tricky stuff, some of the stuff you guys are really wanting. But for today, we can't get onto that tricky stuff until we do a little bit, just a little bit, I guess, of the theoretical. So I noticed pens and papers, that's good. So we're going to need a bit of that stuff going on. And you just want to go through a little bit about the structure of the mind and how your head works. So let me just start with a bit of a story. Have you ever had a customer service problem at I don't know, wherever that store might be? For me, look, has anyone here ever been working for a telecommunications company? No? Good, I can bag them out. All right, it was with Optus. And here I was talking to this chatty salesperson on the phone who I had a problem, and it was all this lip service. I was, oh, real sorry, and yeah, I understand how you feel, but blah, 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 blah. But then you ever get the feeling that you're talking to a person who just can't help you? You know, there's just, no matter what they say, they don't have the authority to do anything for you. You know, that type? Well, I tell you, that is, let's say that metaphor is, it's almost an exact replica of how it is with your unconscious and your conscious mind. Your conscious mind is that chatty sales clerk from India who can't help you. You know, whereas the unconscious mind, that's the manager, that's the guy who's actually got the authority, and as Brian Clemens saying, that's the guy, hey guys, yeah, that's the thing that's actually got the power to make a decision to give you a refund or do whatever it is. That's really the decision maker. So, yeah, probably that one just there, bud. Oh, there, okay, you can be my cameraman. So, if you thought of it like, and I know this is a clumsy metaphor that's been overused a little bit too often, but anyway, rather than what I sort of thought originally was just a big triangle, let's be a bit clumsy and let's do the iceberg thing. All right, so the iceberg metaphor being, here's your head, all right, and you look like a cone head, like Dan Aykroyd, remember cone heads? So there's your head. At the top, relative to the bottom, you notice the top's smaller. That's your conscious, okay? Because relative to the unconscious, it's got relatively limited power. Yeah, it's got relatively limited power to affect you, to affect your behaviours, or to get you where you want to go in your careers. And again, I know we've got a fair few real estate people. I tell you, your conscious mind, and here's the other thing, your conscious mind is primarily where we focus when we're trying to learn our sales skills. You know, our conscious mind are all the conscious reasons for why we should, again, for you people who are not in real estate, just help me out that this is a kind of a nice metaphor no matter what industry you're in. It's our focus where we talk about our points of difference, why you should list with me, why this is a good opportunity for you to, sell your house or whatever the case may be. And then we might be confused as to, with all the logical reasons in the world, why they didn't list with us and why they listed with Dodgy Bill down the road. You know, I'm still amazed and, I'm not quite embarrassed, but amazed that when I first started in real estate, I had no right to win against some of the guys I won against. First off, I shouldn't have ever been called in anyway. Because out of the hundreds of properties that I sold, could they have been sold before me? When I listed them, could they have been sold before me, all of them, by an agent who was bad? The agent, when the buyer who I bought for, who I sold for, sorry, when that buyer originally bought it, is it possible that all of them, hundreds, were done by bad agents? No, it's not possible. There had to be some good ones in there, didn't there? So why on earth did I even get a look in when those other agents, some of whom must have been good, should have got at least the opportunity? So, and I believe that if, with all the conscious reasons in the world, if your unconscious stuff is in order, you're going to get the deal, or the sale, or again, we're all in sales, and if you think you're not, well, you are. Whether it's in a relationship with a partner, well, that's a sale. Whether it's in your ability to push in traffic, have we all made those faces where we've kind of said, oh, man, that's a sale. Our ability to influence. If you're in a pay-as-you-go type job, you have sold 40 hours of your time for $30 an hour, or whatever the case may be. So we're all in sales. And our ability to sell better, or influence better, or communicate better, is certainly going to help us all. So how this might manifest itself, this conscious versus unconscious. I'll just talk to the real estate people in the room again for a moment. Clinton, if you just got 6 listing appointments for the week, and you got 6 listings, so we've got 6 sales in a row, and you went into your 7th listing appointment, what's your chances of getting that one?
Really good.
I don't really care what you say, you're going to leave there with another one, aren't you? Whereas what if you've got, I tell you, if you've missed your first 6 sales for the week in a row, if you've missed them and they've all said, thanks but no thanks, mate, I don't care if that 7th one is a referral that says, Clinton's the man, you've got to call him. I reckon you're going to have a hard time getting that, because you'll find a way to wreck it, you know. And it's not your conscious mind that'll find a way. It's this other bit here, you know. It's this other bit here it'll just find a way, you know. And that's what David's going to get into a bit later, is this self-worth, you know, being able to, without the 6 wins in a row that you have, being able to get you right so that, you know, you're always in that state of mind when you choose to be. So some of that stuff was what we're going for. So the conscious mind, it kind of seems to focus on, and this isn't by any means an exhaustive list. Hey, bud. Yeah, we did underdo the thing. All right, get a few chairs, guys. There's some out in the thing. Yeah, thanks, guys. This list is by no means exhaustive, okay? But this is just, for our purposes here, a bit of a starting point anyway to get us there. Is the conscious mind kind of thinks in the details. Okay, so I'll get you to write down, there's going to be six things that we talk about here, and there's going to be about 10 that we're going to talk about down here. So, as you're doing this, hey guys, come on in. Man, we are packed in today, aren't we, eh? Sorry, man. All right, now, what are we going to do for the last comers? What's the punishment?
I wasn't the driver.
I'm just kidding, man. All right. So, yeah, we'll probably reschedule on the break. We'll shuffle things around and see what we can do.
With your car, you should have got here earlier.
GPS. All right, so, again, these are just a non-exhaustive list, but this is kind of the way these things, the way our things think. Okay, so the conscious mind kind of thinks in the details. Whether something is 2 + 2 is 4. You know, mathematics is, I guess, a product of the conscious mind. Because the conscious mind, so I'm not saying that the conscious mind is useless. You know, it's the very essence, I guess, of our, well, do we say that I think, therefore I am, was the first step in consciousness. When that consciousness emerged, and we suddenly became a self-aware being, well, that's an amazing thing. So I'm not saying our conscious mind is useless. So, I mean, it was your conscious mind that balanced your checkbook and that, you know, paid for, you know, did whatever sales you had to do to come and be here for this course. So, you know, it handles a lot of good stuff. It just doesn't have the relative power of your unconscious mind, you know. So your conscious mind kind of focuses on the details, the facts and the figures. Yeah, does it make sense, you know? Whether something is 20 degrees or 24 degrees. You know? It's focused, it's sort of got a time sense. It's another thing, so I'll get you to write a couple of these down, you know. It's sort of got, you know, a time sense, as opposed to, you know, and we'll get to this in a minute, your unconscious, which kind of doesn't think with a time sense. It kind of, it kind of thinks differently. Your conscious thinks about the content of stuff. You know, the content, as opposed to how things get done. It thinks about what, you know, the content. The conscious mind is certainly only able to think about limited things, and I've written here single tasking. And there's an ongoing discussion, I believe 7 ± 2 units of information that the conscious mind can hold on to at any one time. Like if I said, you know, if I said to you guys, or if I said to Darryl, you know, think about an elephant and think about a broom. I mean, your conscious mind will probably do one of two things. It'll think about elephant, then a broom, and an elephant, and a broom, and an elephant. Or it'll bring up a picture of an elephant with a broom next to it. You know, that's kind of how it thinks. So in single tasking. And it thinks with logic. You know, logic is certainly an aspect of the conscious mind. Now, of course, that's not an exhaustive list, but that's just kind of how our conscious intellect thinks. That's our IQ. It's kind of, you know, that verbalised chatter that goes on in your head. That's your conscious mind. What you're thinking about at any one time. I've heard one definition that your conscious mind is what you're thinking about at the moment, and your unconscious understanding or unconscious or subconscious mind is everything else. You know, so like, what's that angle?
Right.
A right angle, yeah. Now, where was that information in your head before you answered it? You know, it was down at that unconscious level, wasn't it? So it was there, but just you weren't aware of it at the time. You know, so again, people like Milton Erickson and other hypnotists might say that you're conscious of, you know, listening to me and speaking to me, but what you weren't conscious of was the pulse in the back of your right ankle. Or you weren't until I brought your attention to it, and now you've kind of got your awareness down there trying to sort of think, oh, can I feel my pulse down there? You know, you see what I'm saying? That you're sort of unconscious to everything else. So, where is your unconscious? Let's go through some of the ways it thinks. And this is going to be the basis for kind of what David talks about, is that this is just setting a foundation that we're going to get into some other really cool and usable stuff over the course of these 2 nights that we're going to hang out together with. So, first off, as opposed to single tasking, your unconscious mind is wonderfully good at multitasking. Okay, it's doing everything on a lot of different levels. If you were at your job interview, where you're the employer, and you're trying to ascertain whether this person is good enough for the job, your unconscious is sitting there looking at their posture. It's sitting there looking at their dress. It's looking at their body language. It's looking at their tonality. It's analysing the smell of their breath at the same time as the pitch of their voice, at the same time as how they look, smell, feel, taste, if you're close enough. The employers are thinking, yeah. But all those multiple senses all at once, and then the language it speaks to you in, again, is that language of feeling. So, and it gives you those feelings or, you know, those things. So it's multitasking. And it's kind of doing that on, now this is going to be a different one, let's say multiple levels. What it's doing, your unconscious, is while it's hearing, and this is kind of the reason that a process that we, and I don't know if we'll have time within the scope of this to get to it, but who's heard of a concept called anchoring? And I know there's a few NLP guys in the room, so a few of you have got that. Well, this is the reason that anchoring works. And what anchoring means is that when a visual, when a kind of, let's say an emotional state happens within us, what it does, because of this multiple levels analysis thing that the unconscious has got, it kind of associates one thing with another. And normally what it associates is the feeling or state. Again, I think the term state is overused in NLP circles, but the state or emotional feeling, however you're feeling right now, if that is accompanied repetitively or intensely by, if that feeling is intense or repeated, and it's accompanied by another stimulus, be it a touch, be it a sound, those things get linked, maybe even a smell. You know, and we've all, you know, let's get this back into real world, we've all probably had some sort of intense emotional experience, and on that day, say a wedding, you know, a lovely time, when there's been a lovely wedding, and throughout the whole of that day, a certain song got played 3 or 4 times. You know, so now every time you hear that song, you just can't help but think about that particular time. It might be a funeral, it might be something not so pleasant. For me, whenever I smell frangipanis, you know, I don't cognitively, with my conscious mind, think, frangipanis. My grandma had a frangipani tree in her backyard, and that reminds me of that frangipani tree. It's nice, bang. I smell the frangipanis, and I'm just there. You know, I'm in her backyard. Well, that's an example of an anchor. Now, you guys who are running a bit late today, if on the way here, there was a red and blue flashing light in Dylan's rear vision mirror, what would have happened to his heart rate?
It was an ambulance.
But before you realised it was an ambulance, what happened to your heart rate?
Yeah, it jumped.
Went up. What happened to his grip on the steering wheel? Did it go from down in his lap to the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock positions on the steering wheel? You know? Where did his eyes go immediately? Speed up. Absolutely. What didn't happen is this conscious mind didn't come up and say, if I was speeding, which I'm not, but if I was, and that was a police officer, which, oh, by the way, I notice it's not, but if it was, they would have given me a ticket for $300, and, oh, what would I rather spend my $300 on? None of that stuff would have went on. It's just bang, the stimulus occurs, and bang, the heart rate goes up, and the feeling happens, yeah? He wasn't born like that. Somewhere between his... Because I've got a 1-year-old. My little 1-year-old sees a red and blue flashing light, you were. But my little 1-year-old sees a red and blue flashing light, and he goes, ooh, that's pretty and all that, you know what I mean? We learnt somewhere to what we call anchor that visual stimuli, and that's almost a universal experience. We've learnt to accompany that visual stimuli with those feelings. So our lives are full of these things called anchors. Here's the cool thing, with some of this training that we may or may not get to, but companies are doing this to you all the time. They're anchoring their product to a certain feeling that they want to instill. There's one on TV at the moment with Telstra. Has everyone seen that lady in the boardroom? She's in the boardroom, she gets a phone call from mum, and the guy says, take the call from mum. So here is, and that is a almost identical advertising campaign as was going on with AAPT over in America. I think the AAPT one was actually a little bit better, because in that one, it's showing the pain of not calling, and there's mum being all sad that they never call, and then the guy says, okay, I'll call, and then he's calling with AAPT, and now mum's feeling all good and heartfelt, and then when you're feeling all good and heartfelt, and he's finally called mum, bang, AAPT. Anchoring that feeling of good and nice with their brand of AAPT. It's very clever, and it's communicating with that part of you. It's not trying to say consciously you should use AAPT. Okay, they might be addressing it on that level in some ways, but that's the thing with that multiple levels. That's part of the reason that anchoring and stuff works, and I was doing it today. It's absolutely, you don't need to be AAPT to do it. If you ask the right questions of Dylan, and every time he laughs, and this is Dylan by the way, and every time he laughs you just go like that and say, you know, and touch him right there, do that a couple of times and you've anchored this touch with a feeling of laughing, or with a feeling with good feelings. Pretty soon you don't even have to tell the joke, and you just simply touch him there, and he gets, now look, he doesn't burst into immediate laughter. Well, maybe he will, I don't know. But it's a subtle thing, you know, and all of this stuff is all about doing these little extra things in order to be a better communicator. Yeah. So, all right, next way that the unconscious thinks is in the process. And I know this is a bit more NLP jargon, this thing, content and process, but maybe David can... David is a master. What I love about David Kennedy, and you're going to hear from David a lot in these next couple of nights, he's a master of taking this NLP type jargon and dumbing it down for me, and I love that. In that he'll take these big words, because NLP's full of a little bit of... Look, they purposely made it confusing to keep me out of it. Right, they did. They made all these big words and all these very intelligent, conscious minds, and it was written by design. You know, they tried to keep, you know, I don't know if it was their intent, but, you know, the medical community, maybe they wanted to keep everyone but a doctor out of the deal. I don't know. But David's, you know, may be able to help me out with some of these content versus process. Anyway, the process of how things get done as opposed to what's getting done. This thing, the unconscious speaking in process. For example, a lot of the time when people come to us, say therapeutically, they want change in some way in their life. And for the most part, the beliefs or whatever it was that is allowing this person that I'm working with to be the person they are, to have the problem that they've got, it'll hark back to a time in their history where at some stage it may have been relevant. You know, someone who's got a severe phobia, be it of heights or be it of snakes or something, what if at that time of their life having a fear of snakes was necessary? Or at least the unconscious thought it was necessary. Because the unconscious, as I said, doesn't have this logic thing. So, you know, so I might say something like with this process, I might say something, I can tell a story about my brother. And there's actually a true story, but it's still a true story with a kind of a, you know, we might say metaphor, is I might say my brother, he visited our grandmother's house that our grandmother owned when when we were growing up. But he hadn't visited that yard since he was in single digits. He was either, you know, 6, 8, 9. And here he was some 32 odd years old. And he hadn't visited that yard in, you know, 25 odd years. And when he got back to that yard, he remembered the yard as big and expansive. You know, he remembered the hill as quite steep in the backyard. And this mango tree that was in Grandma's yard, he remembers it as giant. Then when the 25 odd years later, when the 30-something-year-old man goes to visit that yard, the yard seems smaller. You know, it was the same yard, but it just seemed subjectively smaller. The hill seemed not as steep, you know, and the tree seemed like it had shrunk. Now, the yard hadn't changed. The hill hadn't been landscaped, you know, and he knew that on some level. And the tree, probably in 25 odd years, probably grew. But he changed, yeah? So the unconscious understands that story. When I tell that story, sometimes I won't even make the link there. Sometimes I won't even say something like, so, you know, in the same way I'm going to ask your unconscious to go through your history, find the beliefs that need to be undone and stuff like that. Now, sometimes I do that, but the unconscious doesn't need that leap. It just hears the story, applies it to the person, and the moral of that story, for your conscious minds to understand, is things that are true for a child are no longer relevant for an adult, or may not be relevant for an adult. You know? Now, again, we're talking to real estate people in the world. What are we taught when we're about 5 or 6 years old? What's one of the first rules? Throw out some of the rules that we get when we're 5 or 6 years old.
Don't talk to strangers.
Don't talk to strangers. Real estate people in the room, is that the death nail in your career? If you still live by the credence, don't talk to strangers? It's the death nail in your career. You're gone if you still have that flitting around in the back of your belief structures. So things that were relevant for a 5 or 6-year-old may not be relevant for a 30, 40-year-old. You know? The unconscious understands that process, that it hears me talk about my brother, and it gets the point that if you come to me because you need to be more aggressive or more assertive in your sales career, and I tell that story within a hypnotic session, the unconscious gets it. Because it gets the process and it relates it in a, you know, I won't say a magical way, but it just gets it. It doesn't need as much kind of, you know, in fact, when we try and explain it logically a little bit, sometimes the unconscious doesn't get as well affected as if you just let it make the leap. And that was one of the things that I had to get my conscious mind out of the way when I was studying this diploma of clinical hypnosis. I had to get this conscious intellect out of the way and let the unconscious do its work, you know. So, all right, next bit. The unconscious responds to vagueness. Now, I'm not saying you guys should all be vague, but the unconscious doesn't mind and kind of responds to vague statements. I mean, I've heard some and read some hypnotic scripts that don't say a gosh darn thing. And there are certain language patterns that, you know, they don't really say anything. But when heard by the listener, they make perfect sense because they're vague. You know that feeling that you get when blah, 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 you know. What feeling? You know, I'm not describing the feeling. When you hear the statement, you're adding the meaning to it. You know, so the next bit is symbols. Now, I'm going to go out, I think our whole life, this symbol thing, or we might call it, you know, a metaphor, thing, one thing representing another. The unconscious, look, our whole lives have been spent equating one thing to another from when we were a kid. In fact, that's, we have to be that way. If we weren't that way, we couldn't exist. You know, we have to say how one thing relates to another. So with symbols, that's why branding, again, within sales companies, that's why that's important. Because, you know, they'll get a certain symbol to symbolise another thing. The LJ Hooker girl, when there's a cute little girl saying, "Thank you, Mr. Hooker." It's a nice symbol. You know, now, again, in another form of sales, let's call this religion, and I don't mean to, you know, I'm not saying, you know, doesn't matter what your beliefs are religion, but does the cross not have a certain symbol for some people? Now, here's the thing about the unconscious. If the symbol represents a feeling or a belief, whatever that may be, and let's use religion as a case study because it's nice and controversial, and I don't mind that. Let's say the cross represents a certain feeling of faith or whatever. Manipulate the symbol and you manipulate the feeling. You know, we've seen that. If you try burning a cross in the wrong, you know, demographic, you're going to get some pretty intense feelings, aren't you? Because you're manipulating, it's not the piece of wood. You know, wood burns every day. It's what that wood, that cross represents. Manipulate the symbol, you manipulate the feeling. There's a process that we use, again, in hypnosis, in these rooms, talking about pain management. Okay, so someone's in chronic pain, and what we get them to do within a hypnosis session is, within the presence of what we call a hypnotic trance. Now, let's just take a little sidetrack. When I say the word hypnotic trance, let's get back to this symbols thing. That word trance has different meanings for every one of you. Some of you guys, who this is the first exposure to anything like these materials that we're talking about, I say the word trance, and some of you guys I might have even lost then and there. Well, you think, trance, what's this freak talking about? Is he going to start chanting or whatever? All of you guys experienced trance probably a couple of times today. If you were driving here and you missed an exit because you were thinking about something else, now I know some of you guys drove here in groups, but if you're driving between here and your home, and you get home and you think, how did I get here? Where'd the last 8 Ks go? Well, you've been in some form of a natural everyday trance. So when I say words like hypnosis and trance, don't think I'm necessarily meaning anything too mystical, you know, because what I just said then is an example of everyday trance. So where was I going with that? With the symbols? Oh, okay, yeah. So we're talking about the pain management thing. What we get them to do is, in the presence of this daydream-like state that we call hypnosis, what we do is we ask the person to think of a number just between 1 and 10 that kind of symbolises their level of pain. And someone might say, you know, they're at an 8 out of 10, you know, where their lower back is just killing them every minute of every day, and they're at an 8 out of 10. So we might say something like, now the number you see is the number you feel. And the number you feel is the number you see. So we say that a few times, we get that in so that that number represents as a symbol. It's a symbol of their pain. And then, as we go throughout the session and we lower the number, what happens? We manipulate the symbol, we're manipulating the feeling. So throughout the course of this coming couple of weeks, or again, should you consider maybe studying further some of these principles, there's plenty of demonstrations that I've seen out there with balls of colour, you know, imagining with your eyes closed, and I'm not saying do this now, but holding your hands out and picturing a ball of, you know, blue light that represents warmth or something. And again, as you make that ball bigger, manipulate the symbol, manipulate the feeling. You know, it's a really interesting way that the unconscious thinks within symbols. So another thing that the unconscious really responds to is roles, as in R-O-L-E-S, as opposed to roles. Roles as in our role within relationships, or our roles. The unconscious recognises these role structures very, very well. Playing roles. So from a sales perspective, if you come across in a certain role, let's say the role of the salesman, now ladies in the room, you go into a shop, your first thing when you walk into the shop and the salesman comes up to you, says, "Can I help you, ma'am?" What's your response? No. No? What else? Just looking? Absolutely. They've played their role, you've played your role, and everyone's happy. You know? Salesman thinks, "Oh, I've done my job, geez, it's a hard week." You know, they asked the wrong question. They just played the role, you know. If you come across as the preacher, you're going to get a response how that particular person responds to preachers. You come across as a teacher, they're going to be the student. You know, now it's great if they were an attentive student and whenever a teacher comes along, they prick their ears up and they want to learn. But what if they were the rebel at school? You know, these roles are deep-seated, and look, without kind of getting too deep into any specific case histories, because, you know, again, that wouldn't be correct, but I've had some people where they have played the role in relationships time after time after time, and they wonder why they are continually having horrible things happen to them in relationships. And I can't flat out say, well, it's your fault, but I tell you, there's a certain thing to be said about these roles, in that her role is to be the victim. And so she will find herself in roles, relationship after relationship, where she'll play the victim. And if she's playing the victim, the person she's with's unconscious recognises that, and it plays the oppressor. You know? So roles are certainly very, very familiar. So what you want to do is make sure when you're playing your role, it's a role that's going to work to your favour, and, you know, to your best advantage. Next thing, no time sense. I think I've got that sometimes. My unconscious is kind of working. But no time sense. What I mean by that is your unconscious doesn't necessarily care about how long stuff has gone on. you know, it's really, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. That's why I've dedicated my life to the study of how this lump of stuff between our ears works. I've had people that have come to me with phobias that have been deep-seated. You know, phobias, like chronic phobias of geckos. You know, now, to you and I, this may seem, you know, a bit weird, you know, being scared of a little harmless gecko. But this lady, this was chronic, long-lasting since she was like 10 years old. And here was a 50-year-old woman who has lived with this chronic phobia of geckos for 40-odd years of her life. And the unconscious didn't care that within a 3/4 of an hour session she left here saying, I've got to go find one. You know, 40 minutes versus 40 years. You know? There was a lady who came to me with a ridiculously profound fear of cockroaches. Now, I don't love cockroaches myself, but she was chronically, morbidly fearful of cockroaches, to the point where her husband was sitting in the corner of that room over there, she was sitting in the chair, and she was ready to leave her husband, who she deeply loved. Because she was an American, and he was an Aussie, and she couldn't be in our country because of the amount of cockroaches we had, you know. And she was ready to leave him, leave our country, and leave her relationship that she dearly loved, because she just couldn't do it. And within 1.5 hour session, you know, probably an hour and a half, but we could have done it in, it was probably an hour of talking about hypnosis and, you know, what it is and what it isn't, then half an hour of doing what we do. Within half an hour, and here's the thing with this lady, she couldn't book the appointment with Rachel here. She couldn't book the appointment without tears. We were talking about just a bit of fluff about hypnosis and what it is, what it isn't, because she had in her mind that it was look into my eyes and do what I say. And I trust after these 2 weeks you'll understand that that's not what hypnosis is. But she had in her mind all that. So, but if I ever started to lean towards the fact that I was going to say, right, what are you here for? Well, let's get down to business. I saw the terror on her face. You know, tears started flowing. You know, not profound sobbing, but tears. Real chronic fear of cockroaches. And at the end of that session, she rubbed her hands together and said, right, I've got to go find a roach. And her husband's jaw dropped, because she couldn't even say the word to book the appointment without tears before coming to see us. So the unconscious doesn't care how long stuff takes. It kind of thinks of time in a more relative fashion. You know, this is more or less than, you know, X. And that comes into, I won't get into fractionation now, but yeah, it kind of doesn't have a time sense. I suppose it's kind of like when you go to sleep at night. You don't have a time sense of the 8 hours that you were asleep for, you know. So yeah, it kind of thinks more along the lines of similarities and differences between stuff. One thing being relative to another, I guess, and that might almost be another one of these. Similarities and differences. So, now, but the main, there's 3 really big bits of the unconscious that I want to talk to you about. The first one, I'll get you to write these all down, then we'll discuss them one by one for about 10 more minutes, 15 minutes. So the first one is social instinct. I'll just put social instinct or social proof. So I'll get you to write that. Social instinct or social proof. The next one is, and I apologise if it's getting a bit low and you guys, so you'll just have to listen. The next one is energy, effort, and I think I'm only writing for my benefit here, so I'll just stop. Energy, effort and engagement. Okay, energy, effort and engagement. And the third one, which is, I believe, the biggie, is safety, security, and survival. Those are the 3 biggies. Now let's, once you've gotten that down, so we've got social instinct or social proof, effort, energy, and engagement, and safety, security, and survival. So let's start with the first one, being social proof. The unconscious is very, very aware of and very, very respectful of what other people think of an idea, or what other people think of you, or what other, you know, if you're, I mean, there is absolute psychological studies done that I can't quote, but that are true, where if Richard Branson is seen next to an attractive female, that what Richard Branson has got to say is statistically more believed than if he was by himself or with me. Okay, there's the social proof of if a lot of people think the thing that you're trying to spout, let's say in sales, It's seemed to be more. I mean, that's why testimonials. I tell you, if I wanted to give you the value of your seminar for 2 weeks, it's in this principle right here. For you guys in real estate, I'll just make your 2 weeks worth your while now. Or should I do it on the last hour of the last night? Do it now, Steve. All right. Here's what you do. You need testimonials coming out of your bot. Now, I know everyone's saying, yeah, of course, Glenn. Of course I do. Do I have my phone? Yes, I do. Here's what you would say to a person when they're in the peak state of you having done the service for them. Let's say settlement day, or let's say unconditional day. One of these other days where you've just done the best job for your client that you could do. For yourself, Michael, your trampoline sales? Yeah. What would be the peak day for you? Would it be when it's delivered and they're bouncing on it with the kids for the first day?
When you make the sale.
When you make the sale, that'll be the peak time? Okay. Anyway, we need that. When the client's feeling best about you, and you say to the client something like, now you haven't got you haven't got anything to record the testimonial yet, but you ask for something like, can I just ask you, how's it feeling right now? How have we done? Just for my benefit, how have we done as far as this sales is concerned? And they'll tell you, So they're going to then, because what you don't want to do is pull out the thing that you're going to record the testimonial with and say, you don't pull out the video camera over there and say, right, Cherie, how'd they do? Because video cameras aren't good. So you get them to do in their thinking first. So you get them to do their thinking. Then once they've sort of said that, oh, you did a great job, Cherie, you got me more than this price, or you did this, you did that. Excellent. Well, look, can I ask you don't mind if I just record that and just so I can share it with others? You don't mind if I can capture that just so I can help someone else as much as I've helped you? So, Now, we're going to talk about this next week. We're going to talk about embedded commands. Did anyone spot what I said there that might have been considered a little more compelling than what I might have? Did anyone spot why that might have been a good thing to say? Okay, now I thought some of you NLP guys might have. Yeah, so, or Deborah?
You basically said the question part of that was lower, and then the rest of it was like a command, we're going to do this. But the 3 question words, they were much lower tone.
Right, I didn't even spot that myself. I didn't do that consciously, let's say. But what Dylan said is what I'm saying. I didn't say, can I ask you, Steve, did I do a good job? I said, you don't mind, can we capture that? You know what I mean? You don't mind. The command was, you don't mind. We can do this. So we'll get on to a bit more of that. But anyway, the point there is you want to get them to do their thinking about the testimonial. If they can monetize it and say, you got me an extra 30 grand more than I wanted, that's even better. If you can get that, and then what you do is you pull out, not one of those video cameras, you pull out, look, your phone will do if it's got a good enough resolution, but what normally is best is just a little handheld Sony thing. That's intimidating. But no one with any conscience, I would suggest, if you've done a good job, you pull out a little video camera, a little camera that's got video capabilities, and you just say, look, you don't mind if I capture that just so I can help someone else out like I have you, that'd be all right, and then click, and get lots and lots and lots of video testimonials. And the reason that that's so good is, when you say something, you're a salesman. You're playing the role of the salesman that's to be questioned. When Mrs. Jones, lovely little lady down the road, says that Eldon got me 30 grand more than I expected, and you got Mrs. Jones, you got Mrs. Smith, you got Mr. whatever, you got 4 or 5 or 10 or 20 minutes of it, all of a sudden social proof kicks in, and they don't even listen to your shtick. They just sign your thing because you've done so well so often.
So it's not written, it's video.
Video, well, again, written works, video's better. Because again, remember this multiple levels thing. They've got audio, so they've got words. They've got video, so they can see little old Mrs. Jones sitting there. It's all believable. If you've got, Stephen did a great job, JT, Tugan, not so flash. But if you've got John Tupper sitting there on YouTube or on the DVD that you've delivered to them, you've done a really good job there. So there you go. There's the entry fee for real estate agents covered. We can do whatever we want now, man. We're sweet. So the next one. So we've got social proof. The next one, effort, energy and engagement. I want to talk to you about this. This is an important bit. If your unconscious acted on every bit of this verbal chatter that the conscious mind comes up with, day in, day out, you'd go out of your mind. All right? Because you think about how many ideas of the day you have in any one day. I tell you, if this part of the unconscious didn't exist, I would have started and dropped out of the law degree every time I watched an episode of Boston Legal. Because I watch Alan Shaw do his thing and I just think, oh, I want to be you. You know? And I think, wouldn't it be great to be a lawyer? If every time I had that idea of the day, I acted on it, it'd drive me insane. Because I'd do it the first week and then think, this is too hard, and I'd drop out. Then I'd watch another episode of Boston League. The unconscious responds to our behaviours when we put energy, effort and engagement into the process. So you coming and doing a seminar like you've done tonight, you know, your conscious might be somewhat impressed with what we're talking about, but your unconscious isn't truly going to make some of the techniques we're going to talk about next week. Some of them require some practice. You know, some of the stuff I've practiced so much that some of the stuff Deborah spotted me doing, and you know, she's pretty well trained, so she can spot more than most of us. I don't know I'm doing anymore. You know, some of these embedded language commands, I don't know I'm doing a lot of them anymore. And someone well trained can spot them. You know, so when you put effort, energy, and engagement into a process, your unconscious finally gets on board and says, "Oh, he's serious about this one. He's put in 2 years of study into this stuff. I better get on board and make it habitual." Yeah? And that's the thing that the unconscious responds to. If you decide for a day that you're going to get up every morning and go for a run at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you do it for a day or two, well, your unconscious, it'll sort of tend to take you back to where you were. It kind of works in that momentum kind of way. You do it for 3 months, your unconscious at some stage in that 3 months is going to say, "Oh, gee, he's serious about it, is he? Christ, I better wake him up at 6 instead of him waiting for the alarm clock, and I better compel him to do it because he's serious about it this time." So that's the thing with anything. You know, you put the energy into it and eventually your unconscious is going to get on board. Look, that leads to the next thing, the safety bit. The safety, security and survival being the last big bit of... To me, that's the primary function of your unconscious, is your safety as an individual, and hence your safety as an individual relates to the safety of our species, you know, and the procreation of our species. And that's the big one. Now, what it thinks, and this relates to the going for a run bit, it thinks that the safest thing for you to do today is what got you here. You're alive, you're an individual, you're here today with the beliefs, with the habits, with the behaviours. You know, the smokers, if there's a smoker that I've seen today, he's sitting there with a habit that he can't stop. Or that he's, you know, this behaviour that he does every time. Because the unconscious makes this very illogical leap that because this individual is alive and he's done this thing every day, since he was a teenager or whatever, the unconscious kind of thinks, wow, he's alive because he's done this thing every day. And it kind of thinks, wow, if I remove this thing, he's telling me he wants to stop. If he removes that, he's jeopardising his existence. I better compel him to keep going. So hence he's sitting there lighting up while he says, I don't want to do this anymore. So, you know, again, the safety, security and survival thing. If every day you sat on your couch playing PlayStation, your unconscious will think, the safest thing to do today is what I did yesterday, so I better not go and get a job. You know, or again, the safety thing comes back in sales. Imagine if, you know, as a kid, you were taught, and that's the thing about beliefs, we learn them when we don't know we're learning them. And our parents don't know they're giving them to us, but they are. You know, so if as a kid, and I can't remember where I heard this story, it was either at a sales seminar, but it was a person who told me this, but I can't remember where. It seems that every time a salesman walked up their front path, they used to hide behind the couch and pretend they weren't home, whether it was a Jehovah's Witness or whatever. And I'm pretty sure this person got into real estate, because I think that's where I heard this story. But anyway, the point of it, where I heard it isn't the point. What would you guys do if that was what your upbringing was? That every time a salesman walked up the path, you and your family hid behind the couch and pretend you weren't home. And then some principal says, oh, you're going to go knock on doors. You know, what's going on in your head as you walk that treacherous path? Everyone's hiding behind the bloody couch. So, and you're certainly not going to feel too safe, secure about doing that. You know what I mean? So, again, the great news is that using some of these techniques that we're going to talk about over the coming time, again, that David's going to kind of go into and stuff, we can undo some of these beliefs. If we've got them and we don't want them, we can undo them. You know, the unconscious, if nothing else, it's very malleable. when you put the effort, energy, engagement into the process of changing it, you know. So, so that's, I guess, how these two parts of us think, and how, you know, with the understanding of how all that works, how can we do one of two, you know, both things? A, work with others, and like I said, I do believe that that is secondary to working with, let's say, ourselves and getting ourselves on a better path, asking ourselves the right questions and being able to effectively, I guess, persuade that unconscious. Because that's the thing about the unconscious, is it doesn't have, we can't just say, righto, unconscious, I know you're in there somewhere, oi, get on board, will you? It doesn't speak that language. It might over time, with enough repetition, because again, some of you guys might have heard of Emile Coué, who just got his medical client, he was a doctor, and he got his medically afflicted patients to just sit there over and over and say, every day in every way I'm getting better and better. Some of you guys would have heard that stuff. I think in one of the Pink Panther movies they took the mickey out of it. I may be wrong. But but he got actual medical benefit results out of just having his clients say to themselves every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. So words may have an impact on the unconscious like that, with like affirmations repetitively over time if said in the right way with the right intensity. But really we can't just say, oi unconscious, I've decided to stop smoking, please get on board. It's a different language that unconscious talks. So both ours and other people's. So what really our goal here is for these couple of days is to help you guys just start to, you know, scratch the surface of getting an understanding of what that language entails, and of how we can use that language, you know, to be a better communicator. You know, again, if half the room's in sales, to be a better salesperson, but like I said, that other half of the room who thinks they're not in sales, well, you still are, to be better at talking your wife into doing stuff, or to talk to your boss into giving you a raise or a promotion or whatever. So no matter what, these skills are going to be very helpful for you, and yeah, it's going to be good. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do now is, if you can, and if David will, if you could, David, for a little bit of time, I don't know how our timing's going, but yeah, if we could I get a little bit of commentary from yourself on this subject? And because David's going to elaborate on this, and I'd like David to mop up anything I've missed or anything I've trampled on. So everyone, just to give you a bit of history, I studied a lot of, and it was real estate sales training that brought me to this modality of learning. I studied a lot of training, and I went to a lot of stuff on how to sell real estate. And during that time I found this thing called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which, as David said, is based on this fellow called Milton Erickson. So I flew to New York City, did an NLP course, read a lot of books, learnt a lot of cool stuff, but there was a gap in it. And that gap in NLP, here I was flying to bloody New York City, and I lived up the road here at Stafford Heights at the time, and this is right here where David does his training. And there were people, when I was studying hypnosis with David, there were people flying in from South Africa to sit next to me in these seats. There were people flying up from Melbourne and Perth to sit next to me in these seats. And here I was rolling out of bed 10 minutes before training would start. So I couldn't believe that there was such a global authority on the mind, on hypnosis, and on these matters, filling in the gaps that were left by these trainers that I'd trained with, minutes from my front door. So I'm honoured that David's taken me under his wing a little bit, taught me so much about this lump of grey matter, and it's still a learning process. It's a lifelong thing. I'm a student in these sorts of discussions more than I'm a teacher of it, and I teach it a lot at the REIQ and other real estate places and things. So yeah, my thanks to David, and I hope you can mop up some of that fun stuff that I've left. So everyone, this is David, and if you haven't met him, so thank you very much.
All about mopping up.
Have you got a bit to do?
But what I'd like to do is to just lay a little foundation for what we will do in the balance of tonight. I know that there are a couple of, or more, 3 or 4 or 5 of my students here tonight as well, and most of you guys are either real estate people, I understand, or salespeople. And I have to tell you that it was a bit of a dilemma to me, because I've been teaching for about 50 years, so I'm I said to somebody today about the fact that I've been doing this for a long time, and he said, "Well, look here," he said, "I believe you." And I have, but my primary teaching has been at a therapeutic level and at a counselling communication level. And certainly NLP is a part of the training that we provide for people. But I kind of thought tonight, or not tonight, but before I came, I started to think, well, you know, what have I got to say to people like yourselves? And I sat around for a few days and I figured out, well, I did have something to say. And so I'm hopefully going to help you to have some aspects of communication that are not manipulative, but they are efficient in bridging that gap that exists between each one of us. Glenn touched on the fact that we say something, and the person to whom we say that thinks about what they've heard. But the communication that I may have intended doesn't naturally or automatically happen in the mind of the person who hears what I have to say. So most of you will be familiar with a seminal NLP statement that the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. And we'll elaborate that tonight. I'm hoping that we'll do some exercises tonight on the real meaning of rapport. We know poor old Anton Mesmer, adept for that word rapport. And when I say rapport, some of you may have never heard that word before. Some of you will have an understanding that satisfies you what rapport means. A loose interpretation of rapport would be me smiling at all of you and saying, well, welcome. It's really nice to have you folk here tonight. And that's a social aspect of rapport. And unfortunately, salespeople, therapists, people who interact with other individuals never get past that level of social rapport. So I hope that by the time we've done tonight, that we will have done a few exercises that will enable you to get to the core of what rapport really is and how you can obtain that rapport with individuals that you may have just met, and how you will be able to understand how they think because of your ability to understand rapport. I'm going to read you a really interesting case history. I'll say some of it, I'll read a little bit of it, but it's so good that I don't want you to miss any of it. And it's a negotiation about commission. I guess that might be appealing to some of you guys. Just how well this was done on the basis of extraordinary rapport. So we'll have a look at that after the break. As far as mopping up is concerned, I'm going to find out how to mop up for you. but if we make this statement, and you made it, you said that the conscious mind is what we are aware of now, and that the unconscious mind or subconscious mind is everything else. But you see, because of the limitations, Glenn mentioned the result of Miller's research back in the 70s, where they established and actually wrote a paper called the 7 ± 2 rule. What they were saying was that a person of high intelligence can deal with between 7 and 9 items of information at one time at a conscious level. Well, that's pretty limiting, isn't it? You had a couple of examples given to you by Glenn of pulling out stuff out of the unconscious. And you do it unconsciously. You don't do it thoughtfully, you do it unconsciously. If I'm careering down the highway in my car and some lunatic pulls out into the same lane that I am, but he's coming towards me, I don't sit there and think, oh gosh, you know, what will I do now? This is dangerous. I'm likely to... You don't do that. If something flies at your eyes, you don't stop and think, oh, I've got to duck. There are instinctive responses. Those are our unconscious processes. A woman came to see me. This is about therapy, but it illustrates the unconscious mind. A woman came to see me, 83 years of age. She was a citizen of South Africa. She came to Australia to visit her family and to see me. She had been through the hands of psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors. She'd had medication. She'd had all kinds of psychological tests to try and establish and to then control this condition she had, which was an hysterical cough. And you might say, well, what's a cough? Like this. It wasn't like that. It was like a hyena. It was like an uncontrollable response. She came into my rooms and we'd been going a couple of minutes, talking a couple of minutes, and she started. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I knew that what she'd come for, but I hadn't heard her cough. So I embarrassedly said, could I get you a glass of water? And she said, you can get it, but it won't do any good. And I got her a glass of water because I was hoping it would do good. And she drank the water and a few minutes later repeated this grotesque sound. She told me that she'd become a hermit, a recluse. She said, for the last 17 years of my life, when this started, she said, I've gradually withdrawn from society. People have tried to determine through psychopharmacology what medication would be best for her to have, and she tried all of that, and it didn't work. And people tried cognitive rational therapy, and it didn't work. And all kinds of things were done over a period of time, but nothing changed. Well, she comes into the room, and I said, her name was Anne, I said, Anne, we'd better get some ground rules set. I said, I am not a medical person. I am not medically trained. So I can't help you medically. In fact, I have to tell you that I can't help you. However, I said, I am a good hypnotist. And I know there's a part of you that knows more than you know that you know. It sounds like a conundrum. So I said, what we're going to do, with your permission, I'm going to teach you how to respond hypnotically. Glenn talked about the fact that everyday trance, that business of driving the car and, you know, getting lost in your thoughts or the radio or whatever and missing part of the journey, in some jurisdictions that's called highway hypnosis. So it's an everyday trance kind of experience. So I'd explained some of those things to her, but I said, you know, this is not enough. You have a certain capacity. We need to extend those capacities. And so, I don't want to make this a long story, but I worked with her for a period of time. Then I said to her, on the second visit, I said to her, with your permission, because I know that there is a part of you that knows more about you than you know or remember, or even have conceptualized as to meaning, I'm going to ask your inner mind, your unconscious mind, to engage in a search for you. And I gave her some prescription about perhaps things she might notice, but I told her that the process will be a subtle process. Well, she agreed to that. And she was a delightful person, an intelligent person, 83 years of age, but you know, upright, really somebody that that I felt an instant liking for and wanted to help her. And so that's what we did. Well, I had taken a long history. She told me about 2 tragedies that had occurred, the death of her husband, the death of her son, in an air accident and so on. And I knew a lot about her because she was so open as I took this history. So, on the second visit, after that second visit was over, she went home, and we had an appointment to see one another a week later. At the end of the working week, on the Friday, she rang me and she said, I have to come and see you again. I said, well, you have an appointment. And she said, but I have to come and tell you something wonderful. And I said, do you want to come earlier? And she did, and we arranged for her to come a little bit earlier. And she said, by the way, David, she said, you might have noticed I'm not coughing, like this, you see. And I said, well, that's really wonderful, Anne. And so she came in and she told me this story. She said, and this is the lady that she was, she said, I really want you to know that I trust you. And incidentally, that might indicate that we had a really good rapport because I'd only met her over 3 weeks. I want you to know that I trust you, and I failed to tell you something, but with no intent to hold it from you. But she said, somehow or other, over this last week, since I saw you, my son-in-law and my daughter went away and left me in charge of the house. She said, thank God. She said, for 5 days, I have cried. She said, I don't know why I cried. She said, I asked myself through this period, why am I crying? But she said, for 5 days she cried. She said, on the 5th day, she said, I had a realisation about something I didn't tell you. But she said, the realisation was such that I saw the significance of it to me. I want to come and tell you about it. So when she came, she told me. Now, to my mind, even now, it seems relatively trivial. But it was around a decision she made when she was at university at the age of 19. And I won't talk about what it was, but she made a mindset decision that she lived by from 19 to 83. And the understanding, now I can't explain this, and I'm not trying to explain it, but the understanding of the importance of this to her at the age of 83 changed everything. 4 months after she returned to South Africa, she sent me an email. She told me about the wonderful social life that she's re-engaged. She's no longer a recluse, she said. She sent me some information about some research work that's being done in the United States on the brain and the unconscious mind. And she told me, she said, when you said to me that I know more than I know that I know, she said, I didn't know the half of it when you said that. But she said, I do now. This is this wonderful unconscious mind. I might have used a slightly different term to Glenn and his way of describing it, and I'm not saying my way is better, and I'm not saying his is better, but patterns of behaviour, I like the word state. State-bound memory, state-bound behaviours pass through that crystal of conscious incompetence, conscious competence, unconscious competence. And whether the behaviour is good or bad, once it is laid down as a pattern, it becomes a part of state state-bound memory learning, state-bound behavioural patterning. So when we come to work with people, when you meet this person, this new client, when you meet this prospective client, you don't have much time, and you might be a very personable individual, but we're not all personable, and some of us are shy, and some of us are retiring, and some of us are relatively reserved, and sometimes we feel we've got to overcome that in some way. But we also know that it's really important to be ourselves. So how can we kind of get that balance right? Be ourselves, but yet be able to connect with this individual. Be able to understand enough about this individual and have them feel that I understand enough about them so that I establish this thing that we call rapport, connectedness. So that's what I hope that we'll do a little bit of tonight. We'll maybe do an exercise or two. Some of the things may seem a little strange to you if you do it as an exercise. I've been in the habit in time past, as part of my learning experience, long beyond my training, of sitting in coffee shops and watching individuals and watching their behaviour and assessing what's going on, watching two people together and not being able to hear the conversation, but working out what's going on just by watching. What a skill. If you possess that, what a skill. If you possess the ability, where does it, I mean, I hope I'm not going to offend anybody if I say that fortune tellers usually are very, very good. They mightn't know anything about NLP, but they are very, very good at reading people. Very good at reading people. And they will know a lot about me or you just by engaging me in ordinary conversation. Well, we're going to start, we'll have a break in a minute, we're going to start by looking at the connectedness of the various aspects of human behaviour that if we only understand them and can do what needs to be done, then that rapport is going to add money to your pocket, it's going to give you a sense of success, it's going to give you a sense of self-worth and self-esteem, because who doesn't want to be successful in what you do? Look, why don't we take a break? You've been sitting for a good hour and a half, nearly, an hour and 25 minutes. So we take a quarter of an hour. I don't want to waste time because we're going to finish around 10, but a quarter of an hour, go and get a drink of coffee.